That sounds good.
If you've got arthritic hands.
Oh, man, it's
Great.
Good.
You know,
It's better than you need to see
Canadians
that.
are hardy souls. There's a big article in today's Free Press about Windsor and the fact that they haven't closed one school or one building or kept one bus from going.
It's because it's
We
south
still-
of here.
We used to walk to school. We used to walk to school in Montreal in weather where you'd blink and your eyelids would freeze shut.
Right.
And, you know, you have to like get them open again because they'd stick. I remember that. And I mean, if you really could get through the snow, you'd cancel school. But that was like, you know, maybe a foot of snow. Otherwise, you just
Yeah,
went.
Windsor doesn't cancel anything.
Yeah. All right, how's everybody?
Okay.
Great. Survivor?
Chilly. So welcome back. We now we're pretty well versed. And hi, anybody online? I think there's probably a few more of us online than normal today.
Yeah.
You're probably well versed in the structure of the soul, which we looked at through chapters 1 to 8. Then, since then, we've looked at in chapter 9 the battle between the souls and how the animal soul and the divine soul both want to direct and express through all three garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action. And that battle happens in the heart, right? With the divine soul primarily in the brain and extending into the right side of the heart, the animal soul housed in the blood and in the left side of the heart. And there they go at it. Then in chapter 10, we looked at the tzaddik and answered many of our questions from the beginning about what really a tzaddik is. And a tzaddik is not someone that just hasn't sinned. Of course they haven't. A tzaddik is someone who has transformed the Yetzer Hara, the expressive aspect of the animal soul that's in the left side of the heart, by using this ahava shebetanugim, this very lofty level of love of delights. They created a huge love in the right side and transformed the Yetzer Hara on the left side, so they basically have, practically speaking, no animal soul. And there's two types. There's the incomplete Russia, which still has a little bit of leftover. They haven't transformed it completely, but it really is nullified. It has no conscious relationship to them. Then there's the complete tzaddik, where they genuinely have completely transformed it, and it's become a second divine soul. And then in chapter 11, we looked at the Russia, and also the different levels of the Russia. And we defined a Russia, again, not just as someone who sins, but also, well, no, someone who sins. Sorry. Russia is someone whose animal soul expresses through thought, speech, and action at any point, in any way, even subtle. Right? So obviously they have not transformed their animal soul. The animal soul is even expressing in thought, speech, and action. Sometimes very subtly, and sometimes a lot. And now finally in chapter 12, we're answering this question, what can a Beinoni be? And we said there's two ways of looking at it. One way is comparing the behavior of the soul with the identity of the soul, right? So the identity of the soul is what? What are we calling the identity of my soul? It's not my... The sefirot, right? The 10 attributes. So my intellect and the midot, chesed, gevurah, tiferet, that we looked at in chapter 3. I don't get them all correct exactly. But we looked at the identity of the divine soul, and that's chokhmah, bina, dat, the intellect, chesed, gevurah, tiferet, netzach, hod, yesod, malchus, the midot and the behavioral attributes. None of that is thought or speech or action. That's all the internal identity of the soul. So from that perspective, the Beinoni is just like the Russia and has all the same Yetzer Hara impulses within the identity of the soul. But in the behavior of the soul, and what is the behavior of the soul?
Garments.
Garments, thought, speech, and action. So that is just how the soul acts, the behavior of the soul, including volitional thought or conscious thought. There, the Beinoni is like a tzaddik. Even though the identity of the soul is at full force like a Russia, from the perspective of thought, speech, and action, if that's all you're aware of, then there's no difference between a Beinoni and a tzaddik. They look exactly the same. So that's one way of defining it, is behavior versus identity of the soul. Beinoni in behavior is like a tzaddik, and like identity is like a Russia. And the second one we looked at is in terms of the relative strengths of the two souls. You have these two souls, divine soul and animal soul. In a Russia, the divine soul has been weakened to the extent that the animal soul can now express, and that's why they're a Rasha. Right? They're not a Rasha because they're sinning because they're a Rasha, because the divine soul is now weakened, and now it's easier for the animal soul to express. A tzaddik has actually weakened the animal soul, sometimes even transformed it entirely. So now the animal soul is gone and can not only not express, it can't even be part of the tzaddik's conscious identity, right? In terms of emotional or intellectual impulses. In a Beinoni, both are at full strength, they're at equilibrium. And for reasons that we'll get to shortly in chapter 13, that's why the divine soul will always be the one that expresses and never the animal soul, right? Because the divine soul has been brought up to full strength. And so that's another way of defining the Beinoni, is that the two souls are at an equilibrium, an equal strength, because the divine soul has been strengthened to the extent that there's no variation in it, right? And we also looked at why it is that we can say the Beinoni has never sinned and will never sin, right? One reason is, we talked about tshuva. That's not a widely taught reason. One reason is just saying, as a Beinoni, they haven't sinned. So since they became a Beinoni, they haven't sinned, and if they do sin, then they're not a Beinoni anymore. That kind of makes sense. But really, another way of looking at it is, and that deals with the level of commitment, right? That first one is, the Beinoni has made an internal commitment that no matter what impulse they get, they're just never going to do it. And the commitment is so strong, and the dedication is so strong, that it's now distant from them. It's like something you did in your childhood, and you remember doing it. Yeah, chronologically, I was mean to that person or whatever perhaps, but I was a child. I'm not a child anymore, and I would never do that. I have a commitment to being appropriate with people, let's say, right? So even though you could say, well, yes, this person was mean to someone in the schoolyard in grade 4, now as an adult, they really haven't ever done that as an adult. That's their childhood, and it's like a different person. So that's the one way of looking at a Beinoni, is just this level of commitment that as a Beinoni, they're not going to sin, never have sinned as a Beinoni.
An adult is 13?
Yes, or 12 traditionally for a woman. And then the other way of looking at it is from the strength of the two souls. That when I've done, what's that?
No.
When I've done a sin, there's a bit of a residue in my divine soul. And we get that because when I've done something, now it's easier to do it again. So if I have a friendship, and it's really important to me that this friendship stay really friendly and good, and then one time I just lose my temper, then perhaps it's going to be easier to lose my temper the next month because I let myself do it. If I decide, well, I don't have money today, but I'm going to just take that gum from the store, then the next week maybe there's more of a chance that I'll take that gum from the store, you name it. So once I've done something, it leaves a bit of a mark, a residue in my divine soul, makes it a little easier to do the next time. So if you're looking at the strength of the divine soul, there's just a little variation there, right? And so looking at the divine soul, you can say, oh, this person has a weakness, and that weakness comes from that they sinned, and that weakness means that they might sin again.
So then they're a Rasha?
Correct. Yeah, that's not a Beinoni, right? Anybody that has a variation in the divine soul, it means they're not a Beinoni, they're a Rasha, and that variation could cause them to sin. Maybe the variation means I'd only sin if I could steal $50 million and get away with it, right? And maybe I haven't had that opportunity, but I'm still a Rasha that just hasn't gotten around to doing my sin yet. You know what I mean? So you can have one sin that you would do in your life, and you may just never hit it. You may just never get a chance to do it. You never get to it, but it doesn't mean you become a Beinoni. It just means you're a Rasha that hasn't encountered the sin you would do yet.
So last week you said that if one is a Beinoni,
Yeah.
then you don't go back and forth between being a Rasha and a Beinoni.
Exactly. And that's like this. If my divine soul still has variations in it, I'm not a Rasha, I'm not a Beinoni, no matter how long I go without sinning. I can't say, well, I had a perfect 2 months, now I'm a Beinoni, and then, I hit something and I stumbled, now I'm a Rasha, but let me get back up to being a Beinoni, now I haven't sinned for 3 months, now I'm a Beinoni again. It doesn't work that way. It's thorough internal work, such that you get your divine soul back up to maximum, and looking at the divine soul, it looks like you've never ever sinned. because any variation that was left from past behavior has been worked out, such that looking at the soul, oh, this person actually is in a state as if they hadn't sinned. As a Beinoni, they haven't sinned. And actually, they never will. There's no situation they can encounter where the divine soul will let the animal soul express, no matter what. So it's not chronologically in their life, they've never sinned and now they can't be a Beinoni, or they don't have free will anymore and now they can't sin. Of course they do. It's the past and the present as it's contained now in the state of their divine soul. It looks like they've never sinned. There's nothing left of that sin, and they never would sin. There's no situation where they would, as the future is contained in the present.
So you're saying a Beinoni would never become a Rasha?
A Beinoni would never sin, but they have free will, and they could decide to not be a Beinoni and then be a Rasha, right? So,
But do they really have free will at that time? Because they're
Say it
because
again.
but he's saying a Beinoni can become a Rasha, and
Yeah.
I'm saying no, a Beinoni who would sin or never will sin can't become a Rasha because then he's not really truly a Beinoni.
okay, so we're asking the same question,
Yeah.
and we're using, would never sin or would become a Rasha, right? It's the same thing. If you sin, you become a Rasha.
Right.
So when the Alter Rebbe says a Beinoni would never sin, he doesn't mean the Beinoni doesn't have free will and can't decide to not be a Beinoni and therefore sin, right? But while the Beinoni is being a Beinoni and making that commitment to complete strength of the divine soul and keeping the divine soul at full strength, they're going to decide not to sin. They're just never going to do that. That's their identity. But it doesn't mean they don't have free will to just stop being a Beinoni and then they'll sin. But the reason they sin is not, they don't stop being a Beinoni because they sinned. If they sinned because they weren't anymore a Beinoni. Do you see what I mean? While they're at the level of Beinoni, while their divine soul is that strong, their commitment is that complete, as a Beinoni, they're never going to sin. But they're not a Beinoni because they haven't sinned. They're not sinning because they're a Beinoni. But they could say, nothing. We even had the example of, I forget the name. There was a great high priest who was high priest for 80 years. I'm sorry, the name's escaping me. You'll look it up. And he was a tzaddik for 80 years, and they know he was a tzaddik because he went into the temple, into the Holy of Holies on the high holidays. 50 maybe years. I'm getting the years wrong. I should have researched this. But then he became a complete apostate and gave everything up. Became traditionally a total Rasha. So even a tzaddik does have free will to abandon their status and then start becoming a normal person and sinning. Right? So it's not that we lose free will. So really it all has to do with the state of the Beinoni vis-a-vis their divine soul and their animal soul. Yeah?
Okay, thank you.
It's a tricky piece. It's a tricky piece. Yeah? And for us, the main thing I like to aim at is behaviorally, really, they're at 100%. Because for us, who are we kidding? We're not going to get necessarily a divine soul to the level of this Beinoni. However, we can, in individual compartments in our life, aim to be more like a Beinoni. So I can take the most problematic aspects of my life, and I can find ways to get my thought, speech, and action more like a Beinoni. And that's going to be progress for a normal person, right? A normal person, we don't know if a Beinoni exists today who's walking around and in thought, speech, and action never once doing any slight sin or self-centered activity, right? Maybe there is. Maybe I've met a person like that. Likely not, right? So it's not, we know we can each be a Beinoni. We know it's possible, but it's a little less important to get the details of exactly what it means that a Beinoni can never sin. And for our purposes, it's more, how can we be a little closer to Beinoni tomorrow than today, and a little closer today than yesterday? And so for that, it's just think about strengthening your divine soul, which means I want to take delight in helping other people, and I want my willpower to be flowing towards helping other people. I want that to be my identity. And also try and think, speak, and act about productive things, right? And just put a moment and a moment together and put a day and a day together. That's our tool that we're using.
Are you talking about Benabuya?
No, it was not Benabu. No, this was a high priest.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
That just reinforces what you said, I don't know how many weeks or months ago, that we have to consider ourselves as a Rasha, but strive to be a Beinoni.
Yes. Well, strive to be a tzaddik.
Well, okay.
Try to be tzaddik, yeah.
And hope you make it to a big.
And hope you become right.
Well, that's what we're getting to. So the oath is, and we'll answer the oath in the next chapter, what that whole thing was about and why there's so many questions about it. The oath is, try to be a tzaddik, but even if the whole word says you're a tzaddik, think of yourself like a Beinoni, like a Rasha, right? So we actually should be trying to be a tzaddik, not a Beinoni. That's the oath that we took, right? But we shouldn't think of ourselves as a tzaddik, right? So we're aiming at tzaddik. Beinoni is something that we know we can achieve, although now we're defining it, we realize it takes tremendous commitment and work.
Why are the labels so important? Why can't you just say we'll strive to be the best we can? Why we need the labels?
I think categories can be helpful internally. We're not supposed to use these labels to judge other people, right? I think that's where we get a negative rap, a negative sense of labels, because so many people use them to judge everyone but themselves. You know what I mean? And in that sense, labels are not useful. But I do think understanding the structure of the soul and the categories is important, especially when it really comes from a structural reality of the soul, right? So it's not like just this category of people based on their behavior we're calling this and this category calling this. It really is a dynamic of the soul, and this category of people is this divine soul is the one that's expressing, and this category the animal soul is expressing.
I can understand the identities of the sefirot because you can see how it all works.
Uh-huh.
But the labels of Rasha, Beinoni, Tzaddik.
Right. So for you, if you don't like the labels, you call it a divine-centered soul person and an animal soul-centered
Yeah.
person. But that's what they are.
I don't have my paper.
It's
You read it's in there. Yeah.
11, 12.
Yeah,
It's confusing just to know you're working on yourself to be better.
that works fine. That works fine.
Send me one down, I need one.
Okay. Chapter, there's,
It's the 11, 12 chapter.
I've got 11.
Get to one.
You should have 12 in there also.
there you go.
At the end of 11, you should have 12.
Grab the wrong file. Okay.
No worries.
No, we don't have that.
All right, all right.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, no,
So that's-
no, I
that's
got
a-
it. So we're in 12?
Yeah, we're in 12. We're in
Okay.
12. We're at page 177.
77.
Ki'im be'itim mizumanim kmo bishat kriyat shema utfilah. We're in the middle of 177. If you're at home, at the bottom of the page, ki only at specific times.
Specific times.
You got it?
Me?
Sure.
Yep. Only at specific times do the facilities of the divine soul hold undisputed sovereignty over the Beinoni, with the animal soul having no effect whatsoever on him, such as during the recital of the Shema or the Amidah.
So the Beinoni, although the attributes of the Beinoni are always active, always pushing, always fighting, the attributes of the animal soul in the Beinoni, there are times when they can actually experience a moment like a tzaddik and have the Yetzer Hara, the animal soul's expressive attributes, not garments, but its faculties, they become sort of dormant. They give up for a bit and they say, I'm not going to try, I'm just going to take a nap right now. And that is during the recital of the Shema and during the recital of the Amidah. So our two most lofty prayers, the Shema and the Amidah, Ad Hashem Sifatai Tivtach, Baruch Atah Ad Hashem Elokeinu. We do it every service here, and the Shema, of course. Something happens in a Beinoni where suddenly now they experience what it's like to be a tzaddik, but only temporarily. Shehi Shat Mochin Degadlut Lamala.
At this time of prayer, the supernal intellect above is in a sublime state. It is a time of great illumination in the higher world.
Right? So we may think you set a time for your service, and so you come and do the service because that's the time you set for it, right? And that's why services are when they are. Kabbalah says there's a structure to everything that exists, and there's a structure to how the spirituality that is creating the world flows into the world. And all the spiritual worlds have a structure as well. And so what we experience as time, there's certain periods when there is a greater illumination of what they call the intellect of the sublime intellect, supernal intellect, and that's Chokhmah, Bina, and Dad of Atzilus. right? So we've looked at some Kabbalah now. So we have these intellectual attributes. They're a reflection of Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat of the cosmos, call it. And there's certain times in our day when though that Chabad, the Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat of the cosmos, is in a sublime state, is elevated, is illuminated, is manifesting, right? Just like you have days when you're more productive intellectually and you sit down and you can go for it, and then you have times in the day where you're just zoning, right? So we're reflecting what's happening above. There are actual times, and when you look at traditional service times, it's not just some annoying calculation to get everybody to be there at the same time. It really is, depending on where the sun is and what time it is, that is the time when this great amount of light flows down and we have access to a spiritually elevated state in the cosmos. It starts at a time and it ends at a time, right? Depending on the day and the portion of the day that time fills. So when the Beinoni, or even anyone, but especially when the Beinoni says the Shema and the Amidah during that time, they're locking and tapping their intellect into this elevated state of the cosmic intellect, and so they just get like a supercharge coming down. And what normally is a love that happens on the right side of the heart will just be much more energized, much more powerful, and will overcome the emotions of the animal soul on the left side of the heart to the point where they're like a tzaddik, temporarily while they're praying. It's a very important tool for the Beinoni because the Beinoni's whole life is struggle. This is someone who, if you think, they've committed every ounce of their conscious energy to doing the right thing, and yet the struggle never ends. They're always just, now I get that wise idea from the animal soul, and now I have this temptation. And yet they've committed their whole life to always doing the right thing. So you can imagine how important it is to have these moments where now the struggle ends, and you have time alone with your relationship with God, and you have time to feel those emotions undisturbed, and you have time to connect in the most profound way and plumb the depths of your soul without the noise of the inner battle that's going on.
So does this opportunity arise for the Russia as well?
To a limited extent, yeah. I mean, depending on what level of Russia. When a Russia is praying, they also experience feelings, but they may not experience them to the point where the animal soul is dormant. For that to happen on a regular basis and to the extent that they're basically a tzaddik while they're praying, you could say, a temporary tzaddik, that happens to a Beinoni, right? I mean, typically when I'm praying, I'm worrying about the time, and I'm thinking about the speakers, and I'm wondering, if the rabbi wants to come up, and I'm thinking, did that person just judge me? And then I'm worrying about my test. So when I'm praying, it's a struggle just to focus properly on the words and to get to a state where they're filled with some kind of real connection and be genuine and take the time. So it's a practice of learning how to pray for Russia often.
So you talk about times like 3 stars at night, or putting on your tefillin in the morning, or
Candlelight.
Is that what you're
Exactly,
talking
all
about?
that.
With the sun, and it's that cosmic, it's amazing. I mean, it blows my mind right now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We'll learn in the future when Shabbat or Rosh Chodesh come around. It's not just that, okay, the sun set and so now we do different laws. It's that in Shabbat or Rosh Chodesh, now the world is elevated and we have access to higher worlds, and we can create unifications with our Torah study and our actions in higher worlds than we normally can. We're given a boost. And it actually starts then, right? I mean, every holiday, every time has to do with the state of the spiritual worlds and what we have access to.
Well, and tying it into the physical world. That's what's just so amazing.
Of course, yeah.
The spiritual world, and tying it into when the sun sets and when the moon's new and all these things. It's just, it's really something.
Good. So that's the one piece for the Beinoni, is that when they're saying the Shema and the Amidah, because they're tying into this heightened intellectual state in the cosmos, now their intellect is able to overcome and temporarily transform and make dormant any of the midot of the nefesh be'amit. But there's a second aspect of it. We'll get that when we get to it. There's a second aspect we'll get to later, which is how the Beinoni uses that moment of prayer to remain a Beinoni throughout the day. Okay, but we'll get to that later. V'gam lamata hi shat hakosher l'chol adam.
Likewise below, in this physical world, the time of prayer is propitious for every man to ascend to a higher spiritual level.
Right? So there's something happening in the cosmos where the Ein Sof is just illuminating Chochmah Bin Dad of Atzilus, such that new light is flowing all over the spiritual worlds. And down here too, if we follow that wave, right? If you want to surf properly, you don't want to just surf in between the waves. You want to wait for the right wave and then whoosh, right? So if we recognize the spiritual wave that's flowing into the world and we balance on our surfboard of prayer properly, now suddenly we can experience something entirely different. She'az mikasher chochma bina dat shelo l'Hashem.
Then during the recital of Shema, or during prayer, the Bioni binds his Chabad, his intellectual faculties, consisting of Chachma, Binah, and Dad, to God.
Right, so binding our Chochmah Bin Dad to the Chochmah Bin Dad of the Ein Sof, that means not just praying with an inspiration about what it means that there's only one being, and not just understanding the details of that and how that transfers into the creation of the worlds and finally everything happening around me and inside me, but also binding myself through Dat so that I relate to it to the point that I'm going to now feel emotions about it. It's a personal experience. So when we talk about binding our Chabad to the Chabad of the Ein Sof or of Atzilus, we really mean not just intellectual, but Dat especially, the part where now I'm going to feel emotions. I'm going to care about this. And it's going to create a love to be close to this one being, so to speak, and also a feeling of awe that the one being has do's and don'ts and likes and dislikes. And if I were standing in front of a king, I wouldn't break their some major rule of their kingdom right in front of them, right? Or standing in front of a police officer, I wouldn't speed. Driving in front of a police officer, etc. So having the same sense of awe that I would have for any other being, it's binding my Chabad to this supernal Chabad that creates that in prayer.
Meditating deeply on the greatness of the blessed Ein Sof.
Right, and the translation here, not that I argue with the people who translated this, but I mean the word dat is not even included in English, and it's hard to even include it, right? L'hamik means to go deeply into in terms of intellect, but it's our dat especially, it's our sense of connecting to and having a personal emotional relationship to the text of the prayer and the knowledge of godliness. That's what we want to meditate on with, is our sense of dat. So it's not just a meditation of intellectual delight. It really becomes something I identify with and I care about.
Is that why when we went to services, and it used to carry me through till Tuesday.
There you go,
You
yeah.
know, from Friday, I used to be on this high, and the music in my head, and I used to feel it all the way into the week.
Yeah, that's what he gets to. We'll get there shortly. That with the experience happening in the Shema and the Amidah, typically in the morning for the Beinoni, it leaves an impression. Okay, thanks.
I'll catch the rest.
Awesome.
I'll catch the rest. I'll see you there.
Great. It leaves an impression, and that impression is what allows them to still overcome their animal soul throughout the rest of the day. Right? That even though I might leave the service and now that tzaddik moment has ended as a Beinoni, and I'm back to the struggle, every time that struggle rears its head, it's the impression that was left during that elevated moment in the service that allows me to then always conquer, always be successful. Right? We'll go deeper to that when we get to it.
And arousing through this meditation a burning love of God in the right part of his heart, for as explained in previous chapters, meditation on God's greatness arouses the love of him within one's heart.
So if you remember, we talked about a long short path and a short long path, right? So he's describing, and he's going to get into in the ensuing chapters, the long short path, or the preferred path. This is the classical path of the Beinoni that the Tanya teaches. This is our technique we're learning. And that is, through meditation, now directing the emotions and creating appropriate emotions. So the same way I feel when my favorite Broadway show announces they're coming to town, the same way I feel when I know I'm going to get, a snow day when I had a day full of really, really annoying stuff, and now I get out. The same way I feel when, my wife is going to cook the most amazing dessert, right? I'm excited, right? I'm genuinely excited. I'm personally excited. I'm looking forward. I'm full of energy. We want to now create those emotions about godliness and about doing Jewish things at Temple Israel and about praying at Temple Israel and about helping people and learning. We want to have guidance and control over our emotions based on what we meditate on. So what he's describing here, it happens in conjunction with meditation time in the morning. It also happens in conjunction with prayer, that prayer should be a meditative experience. So when we say the Shema, we don't just get to it and say it and then move on. We take, if it takes 30 seconds, or if it takes 3 minutes, or if it takes 20 minutes, we take an appropriate amount of time to, as he says, bind our Chabad with the Chabad of Atzilus, go deeply into it with our sense of Da'at, and focus on it to the point where we experience emotions. And we know we can because any one of us is very familiar with doing our resentment meditation that we often do. Right? As we've discussed, if someone did something to me 5 years ago, I can very easily bring it to mind, and within about 2 or 3 minutes, I'm experiencing a lot of emotions as if it just happened. And I'm visualizing the whole thing very powerfully. I'm not easily distracted from it. I'm completely focused on it. Sometimes I'll lose track of my whole surroundings. I'll be in another world, right? All out of something that I resent. And I will create feelings of resentment. And the same with worry. Something's happening tomorrow, and I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, if it's going to turn out the way I would like it. And immediately, I can start focusing on it, and I will experience all these emotions and get lost in it and picture things and very powerfully deep focused on it. So we know we have the capacity. We just have to now harness that capacity for the kind of godly topics that we've been looking at. So if you want to, and this is something I really would suggest, by the way, if we're going to start applying the practical aspects of this book, this is one piece that is pretty important for each one of us, wherever you are, to include, and that is some prayer practice each day. And it can be simply waking up in the morning, saying Shema, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchut Olam Va'ed, and maybe the V'ahavta that you know, and that's it. But even if you take that 40 seconds, and maybe in another minute beforehand, to stop and breathe and project this reality that there really only is one being, and there's no reality outside that, and that's going to be my frame for the day. And then in that state of mind, say the Shema and see what that focus brings out emotionally. Even if it's just a touchstone every day, a touch point every day, that's going to be something we're going to build on. We're going to be adding meditations to it. We're going to be adding imagery to it. We're going to be adding knowledge of the blessings around the Shema and what they mean and their profoundness as we go through the whole Tanya. But if we have that moment in the morning, that is actually going to be for each of us our tool throughout the day for becoming more and more like a tzaddik, and perhaps, who knows, maybe even reaching the level of Beinoni, or at least becoming more Beinoni-esque in our thought, speech, and action. Right? That's great. But as you're seeing here, this is a key piece for Beinoni, is having some moment where I stop and I say, it's going to be about God right now. I'm going to connect however I can connect. I'm going to meditate and create emotions. And now that, as you said, will leave an impression throughout the day. Right? It's great that so many people come Friday nights to Temple Israel, but we have morning services every day, and that might be a good thing to use. Or, like I said, just in the privacy of your own home when you wake up, at least the Shema and the V'ahavta, and have it be something that we'll build on.
Does study count?
Does what?
Study.
Study counts, yeah. Study is what do you call it? It's complementary, right? So there's 3 types of meditation in Judaism. There's study meditation, then there's preparatory meditation for prayer, and there's meditation while we're praying. And each one of them has an advantage, and they should feed one to the other, right? So presumably this class, for many people, is a weekly study, and you may want to revisit that. But yeah, of course, study also counts, but it's not quite the same as prayer, because in study you just do it whenever, and you're not necessarily being helped by this elevated Chabad. With prayer, at a certain time, when you say the Shema and the Amida, you're using that tool to get a supercharge from above, right? So study has its own advantages, which we'll get into.
So I'm living proof of that. I mean, I started going into the morning service for Minyan when Linda died, and went for the 11 months, and then the rabbi said, you don't have to stop coming, and I said I wasn't planning on stopping coming. So I started for those reasons, but it totally changed my life. And you just put it all into words, what you get from it.
Yeah.
And it's unbelievable.
Yeah, so do you find you relate to that? That there's something...
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something more special to start your day with prayer. I mean, I get up in the morning with aches and pains sometimes, but I drag myself to the morning service, and I walk out of there feeling more elevated.
Right.
Absolutely.
Good.
Physically.
Exactly. Yeah, beautiful. Right. Meditating. So that's the long short path to get to the beginning of my little sidebar there. The long short path is using my intellect to meditate on divine concepts before prayer and during study also, such that I now arouse deeper and deeper feelings of love and awe in my heart, and that's how I overcome the emotions of the animal soul that are just self-centered. And I create altruistic emotions, and the advantage is, because I access them through my intellectual focus, and because I can at any time control my intellectual focus, unlike my emotions, at any time I can go back and focus on that and create those emotions again. So the advantage of the long short path is it's based on our initiative, and we can access it at any time. That's one advantage. There's others. L'davka vo b'kiyum Torah mitzvoteha me'ahava. To this love in turn. Go ahead.
This love in turn leads the Beinoni to desire to cleave to him by means of fulfilling the Torah and its commandments out of love. The realization that only the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvah will fulfill his desire to become one with God channels the Beinoni's love into a desire to observe Torah and mitzvah.
Right, so, well, hold on, you may say. We're Reformed Jews. What is all this Torah and mitzvahs business? Can't we just love God? Can't I just meditate and experience the divine connection? Isn't that enough, perhaps? So remember that we're looking at a Kabbalistic text, and if you look back at the chapter 4 classes, where we talked about the garments of the divine soul, we're not looking at mitzvahs as being commandments and you must do that. We're looking at mitzvahs as being points of connection with the Ein Sof. And even from chapter 4 we said they are the organs of the Ein Sof. So the commandments, what we experience as do this, don't do that, Kabbalah says these are actually their distinctions within the light of the Ein Sof as it flows into reality. And each one is a different organ, so to speak, within the light of the Ein Sof, within the internal structure. And when we do these mitzvahs, we are harnessing and we're harnessing our being to the power of the Ein Sof and its structure. And if there's an infinite being and a limited being, there's no way for the limited being to reach out on its own and connect to the infinite being. The infinite being has no relationship to the limited being. But when the infinite being reaches out, which is the mitzvahs and the Torah, now we can use that connection, that savta, to connect to the infinite being. So from this perspective, and Kabbalah's perspective, although it's nice to just meditate generally, that's only elevating you into the spiritual, and God's not in the spiritual either. If you want to really, as it says here, connect with the Ein Sof, there, Torah mitzvah is really the only way, because that's the way the Ein Sof is reaching out Kabbalistically. That's actually within the structure of the light flowing out of the Ein Sof. And the same with Torah. If you remember, we talked about how with the Ein Sof, knowledge, knower, and known is all the same thing. So I know we look at the Torah sometimes and say, well, it's just a document, and we treasure it, and it's our historical document, but it was written by authors A, B, and Q, and this part we see is from this. Oh, fine, okay, I'm not going to argue with that. But Kabbalah says, no, you're talking about Chokhmah of the Ein Sof. And so if you want to bind your Chabad with the Chabad of the Ein Sof, this is the channel through which to do it. And then the intellect of the Ein Sof never separates from the Ein Sof. It's not like the Ein Sof has an idea, and then that idea is floating out like our ideas do. Right? God is the knowledge, knower, known all at the same time. And so when I sit and learn halacha or a piece of Gemara or some Kabbalah or anything, now that intellectual spark, it's not separate from godliness. It still is godliness, because God doesn't have knowledge like we do where they're compartmentalized. So again, there's no way for us, in my intellect, through my initiative, to cross the divide between a limited being and an infinite being. But the infinite being can allow a channel. So that's why in Kabbalah it says, if I really am aroused with a love to cleave to God, that's going to send me straight to learning Temple Israel, coming to service Temple Israel, giving tzedakah, feeding people. The Torah and the mitzvahs, those are actually the ways that we cleave to God. And it's the channel that allows us to leap across the infinite divide between us and the Ein Sof.
It was explained to me also, in comparing Einstein to the guy that empties the basket in his office, that they have absolutely nothing in common.
Okay.
Until Einstein asks him to do something for him, all of a sudden there's a connection that's made.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's God asking us to do something, and that's our ability to answer.
Very nice. Yeah. So when you do the commandments, you're not doing them because you fear the commandments. You're doing them because you want a relationship with the commander.
Right.
Right. And so
And
when someone.
not too much, you still gotta have bittul.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the magic word.
Yeah. And if you say, well, hold on, in the end, this is just a box with some metal that was shaped into a disc, and I'm putting it in. Really, what does it have to do with God? It's just physical stuff. Really, is that God? Remember the mashal, the example, that if a great leader, a world leader, comes and embraces me and gives me a hug, and then I tell people, it's amazing, so-and-so came and they paid attention to me and embraced me, and someone says, hold on, it was winter, and she was wearing a coat. And so you didn't hug her, you just hugged her coat, right? It's not like you hugged her. Well, that's silly. She may be wearing gloves and a coat and whatever, but I got a hug from this world leader. It's always going to leave an impression. It's amazing. So same thing with the Torah and mitzvahs. Although it comes down, so to speak, enclosed in physical form, whether it's a Torah scroll or whether it's a lulav and etrog, that we're still being embraced by the king, even though it's through many garments. So all these tools we have from past chapters to give reality and depth to the statement that once I use the long short path to create emotions, those emotions will now push me to connect with the Ein Sof in the best way possible, right? Which is Torah and mitzvahs, right? Our connecting points. שזהו עניין המבואר בקריאת שמע דאורייתא.
This arousal of love for God and its accompanying resolve to adhere to Torah and mitzvot and thereby to cleave to Him is the essential subject of the Shema, which the biblical deoraita commandment enjoins us to recite.
Right, so what does the Shema say? I'm going to love God, right? There's one God. I'm going to love God, and I'm going to do these commandments and not do these commandments, right? And then the piece about leaving Egypt, which we get to in much later chapters. But that is why we want the Shema, and if you like, the Amidah is good too, but the Shema in particular is going to be our touchstone for how we get to our highest state in the day spiritually, and how we get resources to leave an impression for the rest of the day to try and move the needle in our life closer to Beinoni, or even maybe perhaps.
This with all your heart, your soul, and your mind.
Yes, which is the three garments,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
B'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol medeh-
yeah.
No, sorry, you didn't quote. No, it's three. Levavcha, nafshecha. So levavcha talks about the two souls, both souls, loving God with the divine soul and the animal soul. We looked at that, and that's why it's the binary form levavcha with a second bait. V'chol nafshecha means with the whole structure of your soul, so all of its, all the sefirot within your soul, all your attributes, as well as all the organs of your soul. So my organ of Shabbat and my organ of not lying, or my vessel of not lying. So with all the structure of my soul and its 3 garments. V'chol refers to loving God to the point of actually sacrificing my life for God. Right? So sorry, those 3 are not the 3 garments. Those 3 are 3 different aspects of how I love. And
Physical. Kind of, yeah.
which is physical?
Physical things you do. The might having to do with the physical.
Oh, okay, yeah. Some people translate it as with all your possessions.
Yeah.
So absolutely. From this perspective, we're going to define it for this technique as being with your sense of self-sacrifice to the point of death.
Right, give up your life.
Right? So if someone came to me and said, I want you to shoot these children or I'm going to shoot you, I would hope some part of me would flare up and say, no matter what my nefesh b'amid says, no matter how much self-preservation there is, I'm looking down the barrel of a gun, I'm not going to do something that would just tear me away from my core identity, that would just completely sever me from the Ein Sof. I'm not gonna shoot innocent children, no matter what's at stake, and I would give it my life. Right. So that ability for self-sacrifice, and it expresses in several ways. That's what the Alter Rebbe describes when he talks about miodecha, and we'll get to that too. But the Shema sums it all up. That's why we want to use the Shema as our touchstone on the positive side to connect with the Ein Sof in the morning and have that be a point of connection that gives us inspiration through the day. What about the blessings? Uvirchotecha shelafaneha ulachareha shehen midrabanan hen hachana nikuma kriyat shema kmo shnitbaer b'makom acher.
Likewise, the rabbinical ordained Dirabanan blessings preceding and following the Shema are a preparation, enabling us to fulfill that which we recite in the Shema as explained elsewhere.
So if you ever looked at the text of the blessings around the Shema, they really are blessings that the rabbis wrote to say the Shema. So like many other blessings the rabbis created, they were attached rabbinically to the biblical commandment. Right? Like we're commanded to say a blessing after food, or just think of any commandments, right? The commandment to light Shabbat candles. What's the blessing say? Baruch lehadlik, which means?
To light the Shabbat candle.
Right, so that's pretty simple. If I'm a rabbi and I'm writing a blessing for lighting candles, I use my Baruch formula, I have God's name, and then I say what the blessing is, what the mitzvah is, right? So Baruch blah, 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 to light Shabbat candles, right? What's the blessing for saying Hallel? Do you know that?
Saying Hallel?
Yeah, when we say Hallel, it's very similar, right? So there's some text we recite on festivals and on Rosh Chodesh. There's a blessing for saying it, like the blessing for saying Shema. It's this long, same beginning, Baruch likrod ha'Hallel, to read the Hallel. That's all it is. So really, if you're writing a blessing for the Shema, what should that blessing be? Baruch, etc., likrod ha'Shema, right? Blessed be God, etc., who commanded us to recite the Shema, and now Shema, boom, there you go, right? That would take all of 12 seconds, and that's what the blessing should be. That's the formula for every other blessing, basically. Now, the blessing for the Shema, it's 3 paragraphs. It's talking about the angels flying around and giving each other permission, and holy, 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 and then God's love and our heart, and this, and then after. It's just this wide-ranging thing, and it doesn't even say who commands us to say the Shema. I stump. So how is that even a blessing for the Shema? This is what he's saying here. If you look at the text and the material contained in it, it's actually a meditative preparation to get us to the state where the Shema is going to have emotional impact inside. Because we recognize I get up in the morning and I stumble out and I'm thinking about my day and I'm barely awake, and now, okay, I say the Shema and it comes and goes. I need something that will stop me, give me time to think, meditate on the thing contained in the Shema, which are the angelic worlds where the source of the body is, because we want to actually inspire the body to recognize where it comes from. And we say to the body, your source is just all about praising God. It's so excited about praising God. That's your source. So I know all you care about is coffee and more sleep, but come on, look where you come from, right? Be inspired. And then we read the paragraph about God's love for us, and we say, this infinite being who's creating all these worlds is coming down and paying attention just to me and has this particular love for me, this incredible love for me. And so how should I feel, right? If some great being came, some amazing person came and wanted to spend time with me, I'd feel so overwhelmed with love, right? But that God is doing that. And all different subjects to get us to stop and expand our access to our emotions of our divine soul, so that when we get to the Shema, now it's going to inspire feelings and leave an impression for the day.
So the prayer before the Shema is actually anchoring one enough to be able to be in the Shema, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. That's its whole purpose, yeah.
That's a good song that we sing sometimes. I think it does that.
Yeah. We can find poetic ways to do it as well. But if one understands the Hebrew in those blessings and approaches them with the same kind of creativity, I think you'll find just unparalleled the kind of imagery and where it takes your mind and your heart. It's so crafted for that moment, right? And it's in. I mean, we've been saying it for generations and generations. So not only is it inspiring, but it's also it's already in our epigenetics, so to speak, right? So it actually turns something inside on. It activates something deep within us.
I think a lot of people don't understand it.
Yes,
and that's why that song, I think, is very.
Yes, so there's two approaches.
Yeah.
One is saying, I don't understand the Hebrew, so let me write a gorgeous English song, and great, that works. The other is, let me try and build a different vessel for my divine soul. That's what we mean when we say the divine soul is like a subtle reality in my consciousness that needs to be built. So sitting down and learning more Hebrew and understanding the text of the blessings of the Shema, that's how I build up my divine soul to its full strength, so that then I can access these tools that we have, and I can connect through the pathways of Hebrew, which, as we learned in Shar Yichud Emunah, are real building blocks of the cosmos.
Right, the letters.
Yeah. When I do that, I build a stronger nefesh elokit within me, and I get closer to the status of a Beinoni, perhaps, right?
So might, at least for me, might Manya duplicate prayer before the Shema and the Shema, and maybe pass it out in class, so that we could take it home and study it for those of us who really don't know it.
That's a good idea. Yeah, let me see. I know he covers it at some point in here, so we may get to it just naturally. But let me see how far it is, and maybe as part of starting a prayer practice in the morning for this, we can take a little, maybe half a class and go through, so people have the understanding. Yeah, beautiful. ואז הרע שבחלל השמאלי כפוף ובטל לטוב המתפשט בחלל הימיני מחוכמה בין הדת שבמוח המקושרים בגדולת אינסוף ברוך הוא.
At such time during the Shema or prayer, when the love of God burns in the heart of the Beinoni, and the evil in the left part of his heart, the animal soul's principal area of manifestation is subject to and is nullified before goodness, the love of God that separates into the right part of the heart, where the divine soul is manifest from the Chabad faculties into the brain, which are bound in meditation to the greatness of the blessed Ein Sof.
Right, we don't need the comment here, but that's the moment the Alter Rebbe is describing in the day of a Beinoni, when they are like a tzaddik, and because they focused on, let's say, the blessings of the Shema that inspired them, and then they bound their Chabad with the Chabad that is highly illuminated at that time, and that created an intense light and a burning love in the right part of their heart, not avah shebetanugim, but just a burning love of the Beinoni, and that overpowered the love of the animal soul, the self-centered drive of the animal soul on the left side of the heart, so much that it became dormant and like a tzaddik, right? It's as if it wasn't there, and they have no conscious awareness of it. That means that while they're praying, they're not thinking, boy, I'd like to tell this person off, or ooh, I want to eat, this thing, even though I had, meat for breakfast. I want to have a milkshake if I don't eat meat and milk, whatever. They're not distracted by that, like their normal life of a Beinoni, which is characterized by struggle. Now they're more like a tzaddik. Aval achar tefila b'histalkut hamochin gadlut ein sof baruch hu hare hara chozer v'neor bechalalas moli mitaveh tava letavot olam hazeh v'tanugav.
This state of affairs lasts only for the duration of the spiritually charged time of prayer. After prayer, however, when the intellect in the blessed Ein Sof is no longer in a state of sublimity, that is, when the spiritual illumination engendered by prayer ceases, the evil of the animal soul in the left part of the heart reawakens, and he, the Beinoni, once again feels a desire for the lusts of this world and its delights, since the evil of the Beinoni's animal soul remains undiminished even after prayer, as the Alter Rebbe will explain shortly.
So it's a temporary state. The Beinoni can have moments like a tzaddik, during the Shema and the Amidah especially, and there they really don't have an animal soul that can express anymore. The animal soul becomes dormant. But it's only because they're tapping into this huge spiritual wave of what's happening in the supernal worlds that the Chabad of the Ein Sof is just sending tremendous light into the world, and that's the time we can tap into it. But then when it's done, now they're back and their animal soul wakes up again and says, oh, who is running the show here? What's going on? What's with all this love of God business? Okay, let's think about money. Let's think about cars. Let's think about, right? And now we're off to the races again, and the Beinoni gets back to the struggle in the heart of overcoming those impulses one by one as they occur. Always 100%, but perhaps all day long. So next week we're going to get to a key tool for us, which is the mind controls the heart. And this is really an inborn reality in every human being, and it's one of the techniques that we can use and that the Beinoni uses to always do the right thing in every situation. Okay, we're around for questions. Thank you. Awesome. Stay warm, and we'll see you next class.
So that